Welcome to the second day of the Baltic Summer School of Digital Humanities. So how are you feeling today? Great. So great, yes. I see that you look really rejuvenated. So today in the afternoon, we will continue with the Python workshops. But in the morning, I think we have really a treat prepared for us. I proudly present you Karl Berglund from the Uppsala University, Sweden, and he has a very exciting topic, and I think it's extremely relevant. Today, it's about research in streaming services, and I think it's a really hot topic since we are talking a lot these days about moving from the reading and writing culture towards listening culture and video and culture of images. But Karl will talk about this in depth. He is an author of several books in Swedish. Now he is writing, or has already written, another book called Reading Audio Readers Book Consumption in the Streaming Age, which will be published next year. And hello, Karl, please tell us where are you speaking to us from?
Yeah, hello. I mean, I'm really honored to be here and to be able to speak to you. And it's a shame that I cannot be in Riga in person. I'm actually right now in Åland in Mariehamn, where I'm on vacation with my family. So that's why I cannot come. But I'm here in Zoom as well, and hopefully that will work out.
Yes, but we are still very happy to have you. And I think let's start your lecture. And I just remind listeners here in the audience and in a Zoom, please think about your questions ahead and don't hesitate to write your questions in Zoom. And let's have a productive discussion.
Yeah, all right. So I'll just start. And I think, I'm not sure how you usually do this, but I think it's best if I just go on with my talk first, and then we can have a longer discussion together towards the end. And I intend to talk for about 45 minutes up to an hour, something like that. So there will be plenty of time for discussion afterwards. So the most difficult stage to study, expanding reading studies through streaming data. It's the title of my talk. And just something very brief about my background. I'm an assistant professor in literature at Uppsala University, but my background is really cross-disciplinary from the beginning. So I have studied literature, but also a lot of library and information studies. And I have worked in various digital humanities environments as well. But now I am back sort of in my home discipline, literature. But all the time I work, I mean, across disciplines and together with people from other fields. So I usually say that I work in the intersection between sociology of literature and computational literary studies, something like that. So I think that sort of nails down what I am, more or less. And I also like to mention very briefly that I am the coordinator and the founder of the Uppsala Computational Literary Studies Group, UKOL, which you can read more about at the internet. We are a small gang, but a small and productive gang, I'd say. So please reach out if you're interested to know more. And also, before I start, everything that I will present today is a part of this research project called Patterns of Popularity, funded by the Swedish Research Council. And it's moving towards the end. It's ending next year. And it will be summarized, most of the findings in the forthcoming monograph that Anda mentioned, Reading Audio Readers. It will be out in February next year. But I've also already published a bunch of articles. So if you're, curious to read more right now, then you can look these up. They should be easy to find. And I'm also happy to share this presentation as a PDF file afterwards, and I can send that to Anda, then she can distribute it if you want these references. All right, but let's start. So as I said, I come from literature, and lots of work and lots of great studies have been carried out by means of computational text analysis in this field. I mean, it's a majority of the DH inspired work in literature is, I mean, rather naturally text analysis, computational text analysis. And since then, Moretti's term distant reading was coined in the year 2000. There has been, I mean, lots and lots of these excellent books on more or less various strands of computational text analysis. And I think that all of these studies are really great, apart perhaps from Matthew Jocker's studies, who I think has not aged that well. And of course, computational literary analysis is extremely important, and I've done a fair bit of this myself as well. But text data is, as you know, unstructured data. It's often quite tedious to work with. Raises a lot of complicated issues. It's not the easiest way to start if you want to engage in sort of broad, large-scale analysis. So my point is that you also can use computation methods for studying literary culture by turning to other kinds of data, namely structured data, where there are tons of options, where there is a longer tradition as well that you can build on from book history, from sociology or literature. Those kinds of scholars have used structured data for a long time, although perhaps not so computational, but still, I mean, it's the same thing that you count some kinds of entities and then you make an analysis out of it. So you can work with bibliographical data and metadata. You can work with author data, with reading data, or with various kinds of societal and sociological data. And especially, I'd say for reading studies, this is important, since the rise of, digital social reading sites of various kinds generates a lot of data, a lot of user data. Which is information that can be then used by scholars to gain knowledge about what people do with books and how people engage in books in various ways. So, there are user comments and tags and reviews and all kinds of information available right now that we didn't have, perhaps 10 years ago, but not 20 years ago or before that. And so in book history, before this digital age, reading has, it was always, and very correctly also, seen as the most difficult thing to study of all activities related to books. So Robert Daunton, the perhaps most famous book historian of them all, he stated in the 80s that reading, he stated this, and this is what I have landed for the title of my talk. So reading remains the most difficult stage to study in the circuit followed by books. And also in the second quote here, to pass from the what to the how of reading is an extremely difficult step. And for historical reading studies, this is still true. But for studies of contemporary reading, there are much more methods and materials available. So with the emergence of these large amounts of reading data, this is about to change. So we can learn much more than ever before. So in line with Lev Manovich, I believe that the sheer amount of data produced in the digital world makes quantitative and mixed method approaches increasingly significant. So, and I quote, when we start studying the online content and activities of millions of people, this perspective becomes almost inevitable. So I mean then that all these digital reading practices that are emerging, they also need digital methods or computational methods to be studied adequately. Methodologically, you can divide previous studies of reading and readership schematically by grouping them in three main areas. And the first are these historical studies that use archival material to map and reconstruct reading practices of earlier times. And this has been done in a multitude of ways. You can study marginalia, you can study diary notes, letters, subscription lists, lending records, etc., etc. And just to give you one sort of canonical canonized example in this tradition, Richard Altick's, very impressive, The English Common Reader from the 1950s, for instance. He used then a large combination of sources, really like a patchwork of materials. So it includes bibliographies and sale figures and different kinds of figures from newspapers and periodicals, a bunch of various statistics related to social things, etc., as well as then memoirs and autobiographical accounts by individuals. So all this sort of forms into a really solid material, and then showing how the social history of the mass reading public worked in England in the 19th century. The second area of reading research, it's the one that studies living readers with methods derived from social sciences. So they are using interviews, they are using surveys, they are using various kinds of field studies and ethnographical approaches. And this cultural studies influenced research field, it has several classics of its own. Janice Radway's Reading the Romance from 1984, perhaps is the most canonical ones of all of them. That's a title that I guess that many of you have, at least heard of, if not read already. And they show then how people actually make use of books and why people say that they read certain books. And they often emphasize the social aspects of reading in various kinds. So Radway, for instance, she used a range of anthropological methods, but it all circulates around a quite small group of readers. So it's 42 romance readers in one Midwestern American suburb in the 80s then. And then she used all this information from these readers to challenge the notion, at least by then, that the romance genre was merely sort of sexist and reactionary. So instead, she focused not only on the text, but also, sorry about that. She argued then that critical attention must be paid to what this, quite complex social event of reading and these texts, what they actually bring to readers. And then the third area of research, which is currently very vibrant and very influenced by digital humanities in various ways. It's then researchers that investigate reading practices in digital and social media influenced platforms, such as Goodreads. It's the most common way, but also Wattpad and Library Thing, and there are other sites as well. There are also sort of smaller national sites that you can investigate. And such work, it draws on both qualitative approaches and computational ones. And the latter one then involves scraping, mapping, and analyzing reader comments, reader reviews. It can be these networks analysis in scale, how people review which kinds of book and how this all fits together, etc. And one study in this vein that I really like is this article, The Goodreads Classics by Melanie Walsh and Maria Antoniak. So they studied then one of the most popular tags on Goodreads. It's the tag "the classic" and how it's being used on this platform. So, and how they proceed is that they analyze 144 books, I think, which have been frequently labeled as classics by many readers, and then they analyze their, I think it's around 120,000 accompanying reader reviews. And then they show in various ways, I mean, the multiple functions of this label, the classic. And for the readers, then this label is a very inclusive one. It includes well-known literary works, I mean, of this kind of that everyone should have read. But it also it involves books that people just read in school, or really famous popular genre fiction books like Harry Potter, etc. So it's a very different kind of classic tag than how at least literary scholars in general thinks about classics. And it also gives, they argue then, this tag gives the readers a chance to reflect and partake in literary discussions with others online. Yet at the same time, this tag can work as a sort of an advertising target value and a marketing tool for Amazon, who owns this platform, the Goodreads. But my approach, it's slightly different from all of these that I show above. So what I have been given access to in this project, or our project group has been given access to, it's data sets on audiobook reading behavior, or I mean streaming behavior, actually, from Storytel. And Storytel is the biggest book streaming service in the Nordic countries. It emanates from Sweden originally, but now it's present in 25 countries, I think, across the globe. And second to Amazon's Audible, it's also the largest platform on the audiobook market globally. And as you probably know, there is an ongoing boom in audiobooks. I mean, Anda just mentioned this. This is happening globally, but it happens in the Nordic countries in particular. And the audiobook, of course, has a very long history. It has existed, I mean, since the late 19th century, you could argue, in a variety of technological formats and targeted towards different readers, etc. But what's really new here is the commercial impact. So today, the audiobook medium cannot longer be seen as a niche market, or as a sort of mere substitute for real reading. So it's really competing with print books and ebooks for the attention of book readers in a large and diverse range of national book economies. And in contrast to close to all other book formats, audiobooks have then shown a rapid and quite steady increase over the last 10 years. And most people in the book trade, they expect that audiobooks will, I mean, that the share of audiobooks will continue to grow in the coming years. So we are observing a deep shift, as one of these commentators or book trade analysts have said. And in Sweden then, which is what I study empirically, this is perhaps the most extreme country of them all. And I will show you this, the strong position, by pointing just at two numbers. So in last year in Sweden, 2022, roughly 24 million print books were sold. And this can be compared to that, I mean, around 45 million audiobooks were streamed all the way through in these services. And of course, it's not the same thing to stream a book and to buy a print book. And there's also lending from libraries, etc. But still, to stream an audiobook is, I mean, arguably the most common way to take part of literature in Sweden today. So to study audiobook reading then is to study the mass reading practices of our contemporary literary culture. And in this patterns of popularity research project, we have this triangulated research design that we work with unstructured data, which is then literary text. We work with structured data, which is this reader consumption data. And then we also add various kinds of contextual information and metadata. And today I will focus on this part. because, I mean, as we found in this project, so much could be derived from these data sets. They were just so interesting in a multitude of ways. And if you're more interested in about what I've done with literary text, then you can check out my university page. But these data sets then that were shared with me by Storytel, they cover the consumption habits for all Storytel users in Sweden, for all titles in the commercial top segment. That's what we study. We're interested in sort of bestsellers and the commercially strong titles. And these digital reading patterns, they are tracked both per title and, which is the most interesting thing here, per individual user and hour. So this means that the patterns of each individual audiobook consumer can be followed by these data. So which titles the users, each user listen to, which title each user complete or abandon, when each user listens and when they sort of stop listening. And the largest of these data sets, the second one, which is what I will, that's sort of the foundation for this talk. It covers nearly 75 million logged sessions of book streaming, distributed over approximately 430,000 individual readers. So that's quite a lot. To get more hands-on, because this talk is a part of a summer school in digital humanities, I'd also like to spend some time with, I mean, the actual data and how I have approached it. And basically, this is what it looks like. I mean, so it's fairly simple, you could say. It's a giant matrix file which consists of a couple of columns and then millions and millions of rows. And each of these rows then represents one logged session of audiobook streaming. And if we take a look at just one of these rows here at random, then what this information gives us is that the pseudo ID is the user in question. So we do not know anything about these users at all. So we don't have access to any kind of information about the users. We only can separate them. So we can still look at them one by one, but we know nothing further than that. The ISBN is, of course, relates to the book in question. The hour is when the logged session stopped in this case. And then the consumption minutes, it's for how long this this session of audiobook streaming lasted. So in this case, for instance, this highlighted in red case, then we know that this particular user streamed this particular book for, I mean, just over 1.5 hours in a session that ended somewhere between 5 and 6 a.m. in the morning on the 8th of June, 2020. So this is the level of detail that we can look at. That's quite, I mean, amazing for a reading scholar. So going back to the title of my talk and to Darnton's sort of explanations that reading is so difficult to study and we don't know, I mean, how and when people read. Well, now we do, in a way. And I will get back. I mean, there are problems with this data as well, of course. There are always problems with data, but still, it's a level of detail that we have never seen before as scholars. And that's, at least to me, quite amazing. And also, so it's both the detail and the scale that we can combine, and together that's sort of a very, very strong material to work with. When it comes to methods, I often sort of argue that we as digital humanities scholars should go for the most straightforward thing that we can. I mean, there are so many super advanced methods out there, and they, I mean, can provide very strong results. But also I think that it's important to always start with the basics. And if that's enough to prove what we want to prove, then that's really fine. And I was really happy to see in the program for this summer school as well that just after my presentation, then you will have a workshop on working with structured data in Python with pandas and matplotlib, I think. And that's really great because then you will be able to do exactly what I've done here because I used exactly those libraries. So I worked with pandas. It's sort of my favorite library in Python. And I mean, look it up, really. It has so many possibilities and options. And it's also easy to work with, and that sort of intuitively makes sense, I'd say. And then when it comes to methods, it's, again, quite straightforward. It involves a lot of descriptive statistics. It involves some linear regression, but I never, get more sort of statistically advanced than that because I am not properly trained in statistics. Of course, I have worked with people who are, but still to me, it's always very important to understand in depth what I am doing and what my sort of results show. And since these data sets are so well organized in themselves, I found it to be more productive to just go with the most straightforward things here. What's also important in my research is that I sort of try to narrow down various kinds of reader subsets from this larger whole. And this is something that I will show in the empirical section of this talk later. So that you really can see, the particular kinds of readers so that you can analyze them one by one or one group and one group, etc. That's important. And another thing that's important to me is that when you work with these sort of really massive data sets in a way, hundred thousands of readers, then it can be a problem to just sort of lose sight of what's really in the data. So to me, I always sort of tell my students and my fellow research peers that, always also have a closer look qualitatively at your data sets. So do get involved in sort of the particularities and some examples of these data sets as well. That's extremely important. So I solved this by then looking at randomized example readers. I broke out like 10 readers from various kinds of subsets, and then I studied them by qualitative means by just going through their streaming logs and see, so how is this particular reader actually reading in the Storytel platform, and what does that say? And that provided me with a lot of important information. So a great way to both get to know your data and to gain a more thorough knowledge about what its results means is then to combine, at least that's my tip to you, is to combine quantitative and qualitative approaches also in the computational work. And then for visualization, I use matplotlib, which is also what you will learn later on today. So that's, again, these are standard libraries. They are standard libraries for a reason. That's because they work so great. So as I already touched upon this, but these data sets, they have several benefits. They have, high granularity combined with large scale. They are easy to work with. They are less biased than other kinds of digital social reading data. And they enable completely new questions to be answered that reading studies before only have been able to speculate about, let's say. So I argue that this approach, my approach with this kind of data, then offers a new and a fourth way of studying reading, sort of in addition to the three that I walked you through previously here. I call this digital private reading to highlight then the similarities and the difference to digital social reading. So it's indeed, of course, a question of digital reading practices. But it is the tracked patterns of private reading that are analyzed, not sort of public data or data accessible to anyone. And if digital social reading data is said to enable completely new possibilities for reading research, this is even more true when studying consumption data of this kind, I'd say. And Mark McGurl, he phrases it like this in his book, Everything and Less. Goodreads, with its more than 100 million users, may be the richest repository of the leavings of literary life ever assembled, exceeded only by the mass of granular data sent back to the home base from virtually every Kindle device in the world. And then, within parentheses, we can only hope that literary scholars will someday be given access to all this data. And I'd say that in this study, we have actually gotten access to this kind of data that McGurl dreams of, in a way. Although, of course, it comes from Swedish users who are streaming books on the Storytel platform and not from Amazon's Kindle. Again, it enables a detailed empirical mapping of these practices, and it also enables a way of understanding streaming platform logic from within, and then to critically examining the relationship between those two things. It also raises ethical questions. I will not spend that much time in my talk on this, but if you're interested in this, then we can discuss it later. But I could just say that I have been given access to this data by a collaborative agreement with Storytel, with rather few strings attached, surprisingly. So I cannot share the raw source data with any third parties, but I can do whatever kind of research I want on it. So they are not sort of they're not forcing me to do anything in any kind of way. And it has been really easy to work with Storytel also, quite surprisingly. And for the rest of the talk, I will focus on empirical discussions of this data, but just some theoretical and epistemological concerns, I mean, should be addressed, I think. So the first is this question is if listening to audiobooks can really be considered as reading. And then the very related question if audiobooks can really be considered to be books. And these questions are huge, and debates around them have been going on for decades, really. Here, I will just follow publishing industry practices, where there is no question that audiobooks are considered to be books, and that consumption of these books are regarded as reading. But I'm, of course, aware of the problems with this approach and with all the sort of media-related questions that comes along. That's also something that we can discuss. And also importantly here, I am only approaching audiobooks here as sort of streaming data. So I'm never engaged in any analysis of audiobooks as sound, but that's also a computational approach that you could involve in, of course. And then we have the second concern is, I mean, if consumption data really equals reading or not. And also this is something that has been problematized a lot, at least in reading studies communities. And the short answer to this question is no. I mean, it does not. What it is tracked here is sort of user integration with a platform. And this drawback is important to always keep in mind. But still, at least to me, then this consumption data seem to be one of the best sources for tracing reading practices that book history have ever had access to. I mean, you can compare it with studying marginalia or library lending records or doing interviews or such. I mean, all methods have their limitations, of course. All right, so what can be found then in this data? So today I will focus on two aspects. I will give you, I mean, that's sort of two examples of what can be done here. But this is not the limit at all. And the first is these temporal reading practices. So when basically are people reading books? And the other one is what I call expanded reading. So that's practices of when people repeat or reread books a lot, when they swap between books very sort of irregularly and rapidly, and people who stream books more or less all the time. So I mean, ways of engaging in audiobooks that is much more uncommon, if not strange, to try to translate into traditional print book reading, for instance. Yes. All right. So let's start with temple reading. So it's, I mean, the most common question to ask any reader is perhaps this: what are you reading? And then you can, I mean, so what do you thought of it? And do you like this book, etc.? It's more odd question to ask: when do you read a book? So when are you reading? But yet, when books are read is not at all an important aspect of what reading is and what it means to people. It can reveal a lot about reading practices and the various uses of literature. And I'd say that it's especially relevant for audiobooks, as this medium alters the temporal aspects of reading. So since you don't have to sit down, or at least you do not need to be on the move, and then you don't have to have your hands and eyes occupied while reading audiobooks. They enable reading in many more daily situations. So you can read while you work out, while you clean, while you cook, while you walk the dog, while you drive, etc. And this is a very important aspect of the medium, and I mean, a common explanation of its newly gained popularity. And this has also been highlighted before me. And previous research also relate this question of when people read to where they read. So Lutz Köpnick, for instance, he emphasized these things in this essay, Reading on the Move. And Elise Tattersall-Wallin, she conceptualized what she calls audiobook routines, where her informants, she's interviewing a couple of audiobook readers. They are sort of described in terms of routinized practices. So what I make use of to study this is basically this column then. I mean, the hour column, or the information about the temporal information in these datasets, of course, cross-analyzed with others. So, and let's start by comparing book formats. And this, should have said this earlier, but in the book streaming service Storytel, you can stream both audiobooks and ebooks. Audiobooks are sort of the vast majority of everything that happens there. It's over 90% of the use, but there are also ebook streaming going on. And these things can be compared. And then you get this, if you aggregate all this streaming data, then you get this graph. So according to the data, then audiobooks are read during all hours of the day. And this is, of course, a truism, but it's still worth mentioning, since it's in this respect differs from ebook reading. So as you can see here, audiobook reading peaks in the afternoon. It has higher consumption rates during mornings than evenings, and then it remains quite steady at night. But ebooks, on the contrary, this dashed line here, it has a very distinct peak of consumption in the evening hours. I mean, especially between 8 and 10 p.m., when almost a fifth of all the consumption takes place. And furthermore, ebook consumption also rises on the weekends, interestingly. So Saturdays and especially Sundays are the 2 days of the week when people read ebooks in the Storytel platform the most. But for audiobooks, the pattern is different. Sundays are also an important day for audiobook reading, but it's surpassed, for instance, by Mondays, when people read audiobooks the most. And Saturday is the day of the week with the lowest audiobook reading of them all. So while ebooks are read mostly in sort of, you could say, traditional leisure time, it's evenings and weekends, audiobooks are read at any time, not least during sort of traditional working hours. And if we use the temporal patterns for ebook reading as a proxy for print reading, audiobook reading clearly diverges from other kinds of reading. And I find this sort of the drop in audiobook listening around dinner time that you can see here. You can see around 8 and 9 or 18 and 19 p.m. I think that's, I mean, especially telling as it highlights sort of the unsocial part of reading in a way. So you can combine audiobooks with work or with studies or with other kinds of daytime activities. But when people eat dinner, then they need to unplug for a couple of hours to spend some time with other people, more or less. And it's also interesting to note that all kinds, I mean, all categories of books in this data set, they share these temporal reading patterns on an aggregate level. So I think I somewhat anticipated to find temporal differences between various genres, for instance, but there were no, or at least close to none, as you can see here. And this goes with all parameters that I've had access to. So regardless of subset or author gender or etc., this temporal pattern remains the same. So what this indicates, I'd say, is that what people read doesn't seem to affect immensely when they read. To study this further, now I'm into this sort of trying to constructing various kinds of subsets here of readers. So I divided the data set into subsets based on how individuals read. And then I included only those who spent some time at the platform, in this case, 100 hours, to get rid of sort of people who had just streamed in for a couple of hours or something like that. And I start from these three groups of hours of the day. It's the night readers, it's the day readers, and it's the evening readers. These can be debated, but it was a way for me to sort of try to separate readers from each other, or kinds of readers from each other. And then, since it's really hard to draw one definite line between various readers, then I use multiple thresholds for identifying these. I mean, these levels of distinctness in these groups, and it looks like this, for instance. So there is a large group of readers who read mostly during the daytime and very little in the evening and in the night, as you can see in these graphs. And the three layers here is sort of the level of distinctness that these readers have in relation to how much they are day readers. So the dotted line in green, it shows the group of day readers that are sort of more or less only reading during daytime and very little or nothing towards the evening and in the night. But they are also much fewer than the other lines, who are sort of a bit more general in their temporal reading practices, but still have a sort of a clear bias towards reading in daytime. Then we have night readers. They are fewer, but they are, I mean, still a significant group who read mostly in the nights and in the late evenings, and very little in the daytime. So somewhere between, I mean, 4 and 13% of these frequent readers can be categorized as distinctive night readers. And then we have a significant group of readers also who read mostly in the evenings and very little in the day and the night. And I think that these graphs, they are interesting in themselves, as they sort of give a sense of the proportion of how audiobook readers are divided over the days, evenings, and nights. And I mean, even though the rates are uncertain, dependent on all of these thresholds that I have inserted, they they can at least act as a foundation for future studies of and more detailed work on audiobook reading time. And they also show, which is interesting, that a significant proportion of these frequent readers have rather elaborated temporal audiobook practices. So although there is still a large group of readers who show, I mean, if you combine these three, for instance, you end up with more or less 100% of the readers, which indicates that most readers seem to, to favor one of these three practices. And then there are smaller groups who are really devoted to only reading at night, for instance, or only in the evening. So this common perception that I started with, that audiobooks are read during all hours of the day, it needs to be nuanced. So it holds true on an aggregate level, but it's not true for all readers at the individual level, that is. So instead, what we can see here in this data is that large group of readers seem to use audiobooks in certain kinds of situations, connected then to certain kinds of practices or daily routines. And the evening readers are the one that perhaps most closely resemble traditional reading practices. The night readers are likely both users who read audiobooks while trying to sleep or when sort of dealing with sleep troubles, etc. And they can also be people who work night shifts and read simultaneously. And then we have the day readers, who are the ones who listen to audiobooks in daily situations where, reading in other media formats is hard to accomplish. So while driving or commuting or working or exercising. So to dig even further then, I zoom in on randomized samples of 10 individual readers in each of these subsets. And this is also super easy to do in if you have this in pandas, it's very easy to methodologically get just sort of a randomized sample of 10 readers. And so, yeah, so what I start from here is then you combine the hour, etc., with then just looking at a randomized set of pseudo IDs. So if we start with the night readers, it's very, it comes forward really clear from the data that they seem to use audiobooks for trying to sleep or when having sleep trouble, most of them, at least most of them in this little subset here. And one strong indication of this is that there are a lot of streaming sessions during night, which are of a very specific or certain length. And this points toward this sleep timer that you can use in Storytel. So it's this little moon button here, which I have highlighted with an arrow. And then you can choose when a default sort of option when the player should stop. So it can be 15 minutes or 30 minutes or 45 minutes or something, or when a chapter ends. And this is that many of these readers that I've looked upon, they have most of their sessions are actually exactly 15 or 30 minutes long, and then are at nighttime. So it indicates that they put on the player when they are trying to sleep, and then they are either falling asleep, and then the player stops after exactly 15 minutes, or if they have not managed to sleep again, then they do it one more time, and then you get another 15-minute session. So this is how it goes on, and so a majority of these night readers, they seem to use audiobooks, in relation to sleep and perhaps also sleep trouble. And this is not surprising, but it points toward a kind of audiobook use that have been relatively absent in the discussions, at least in research, I'd say. And it's natural in one way, because when you read an audiobook, of course, it has the great advantage that you can, you can have it a perfectly dark room, and you can have your eyes shut. So, it's a great medium for trying to fall asleep. when compared to other kinds of reading that you can also read. And apart from the sleep time, another indicator for that this is important for audiobooks is that there are lots of these series that are, I mean, this is audiobook series that are dedicated explicitly to get people to fall asleep. So they are sort of published work with the only purpose that you should fall asleep. And this is the series Somna, which means fall asleep in Swedish, written by a psychologist. And the cover texts read like this. These are soothing texts based on scientific methods that help you let go of your thoughts and feelings and relax your body to fall asleep faster. So, I mean, and this is not the only one. There are sort of a various amount of books where you can sort of choose so in which context you'd like to fall asleep. I mean, if you think that sort of a train journey is more soothing for you, etc. And this, again, also this point towards that, I mean, audiobooks and sleeping is closely related things. And then we have another thing that I mean, perhaps not super interesting, but that many of the day readers, they listen a lot, but then they sort of stop and listen nothing in sort of another time frame, and then they listen a lot again, and then they stop. So we have this kind of periodized patterns, which I think is also interesting and reflect in a way. I mean, this can have several explanations why it looks like this, but it reflects a way that many of us read. I'd say that if, I mean, you have a good book going on, then you of course stream and stream and stream until then it's done. Then you might fall out of your reading pattern and read nothing for a couple of weeks or something like that, and then you pick it up again. And then when you look at the evening readers, they are the most routinized of them all, I'd say. So many of them read only in the evenings. They have a clear bias towards certain kinds of fictions, preferably Nordic noir. And my interpretation of these results is that these evening readers, they are readers who have more or less transferred their old reading habits into audiobooks. I mean, so it's the practices that are most similar to print and ebook reading. So the main takeaway here, apart from sort of the empirical discussions, is that both the aggregates and the cases forming the aggregate is extremely important to take into account. You cannot only discuss one of those things when you're interested in reading. There is no such thing as one audiobook reading practice. And these many varieties together form the mean. So the mean is important, but the mean does not equal that most people read exactly like the mean. And then the final thing that I'll show you is these expanded reading practices that I've also found in this data. And it strikes oneself that when I describe sort of the assets of audiobook reading, I said this, that you can read while doing something else, right? While you clean the house or while you work out, etc. And that's also indicates that it's kind of a passive reading practice. It's more or less resembles radio listening or podcast listening than traditional print reading, you could say. That you sort of just put a book on and then you have it in the background, but perhaps you're not engaging that sort of intensely in the narrative. At least you have that option to just sort of listen to books as a background music, which highlights the relationship between reading and literature use here. And what I have looked upon when it comes to expanded reading is two parameters. So it's the number of minutes streamed in a platform, and then the number of books that each individual user have listened to. And you can look at this like this. So here in this figure, all individual users then in this data set are visualized. And so every little blue dot is one reader. And the y-axis is the number of books read, and the x-axis is the number of hours spent. And then the dashed line here shows the result of a linear regression, which by statistical means calculates the correlation between those two variables. And this positive curve here that you can see, it makes perfect intuitive sense. So in general, the more books you read, the longer you read in the platform. And in statistical terms, also this suggests a very significant and strong correlation between those things. That's not surprising. But what the scatter also shows is that readers are indeed scattered. So there are sort of lots of readers with patterns far away from this red regression line. So we have the readers who are starting to read a lot of books, but without that large amount of hours spent. And these are readers that I call swappers. So they are found then in this upper left corner of the distribution. And then we have the opposite reading pattern found in the lower right corner that I call repeaters. So that's readers who read audiobooks a lot in terms of hours, but quite few titles. So what they are doing is that they are reading the same books over and over again. And then we have the last group, which are the constant readers, and that are sort of readers that are outliers in the respect that they are streaming books all the times. I'm not sure how much I should spend on actual method discussion, but I think that my time is I think that I should try to wrap this up quite soon. But so how I have boxed these groups of readers in is by departing from the regression analysis and the M value that determines the slope here. And then I have looked upon when identifying the subset of repeaters, for instance, then I have sort of just made it half or a third of this slope, its angle, and then found all the readers in there to just construct these subsets, basically. And then I find also, and then I can look at separately only the readers who spend a lot of hours per title, so to say. So we can discuss this in the Q&A if you want to go into details here. But I want to look, to show you some of these examples because they are both revealing and fun, I think. And this is the final thing of my talk. So these, the repeaters. So these are the heavy users who repeats the same books over and over again. They are often night readers, and you can take one example here. Or you can say that they are specialized readers with particular tastes. They are really they know what they like, and they are entering these fictional words as more or less of a comfort zone, which they all the time come back to. So you can take, for instance, reader A. So he or she reads almost every night and exclusively at late evenings and nights. The sessions regularly starts between 10 and 11 p.m. and then it goes on for 3 or more hours. And then the recurring 180-minute session suggests that this reader is reading audiobooks while going to sleep or while actually sleeping. And what's really interesting with this reader is that reader A only reads books in the Little Beach Street Bakery series by the British romantic fiction writer Jenny Colligan. And in fact, the first book in this series, The Little Beach Street Bakery from 2014, it makes up over 95% of the user's total consumption. So this book, this particular book, seems to be repeatedly used as a sleeping pill for this reader that is taken more or less every night. Another repeater, reader B, reads even more, and only then Stieg Larsson's Millennium Trilogy. And these 3 books, they are repeated in order over and over again during days and nights. So for this reader, the book series seems to be, used as a kind of live soundtrack that's constantly plugged into his or her ears. If looking at the swappers instead, and here I use the same method, but then reversed. They are readers who try out a lot of books, only to abandon most of them early on and move on to ours. And you can say that this is a sort of an open and curious kind of reader, but also an impatient one that wants to get the most out of their subscription. So one example, reader C reads approximately 1 hour a day in mixed genres. But what's most notable here is the high number of unique books and authors that this particular reader has started to read. So the typical pattern is to rapidly try out a number of books then before sticking to one. So for instance, then, in November 2020, the user tried out a number of books in very mixed genres before then settling with Delia Owens' Where the Crawdads Sing, which was completed. And then again, the reader tried out another 9 novels and abandoned them before completing the next one. And this I will. And then we have the constant readers are found here. Again, a similar method. And they are binge readers who listen to books more or less constantly in their up to 5 or 6 or 7 hours a day. And they often repeat entire series, etc. And reader D reads almost all the time, both in the day and in the night, mostly crime fiction. And the pattern is that when he or she finishes a book, then instantly the next is started. And very few books are not completed. And this user also binge readers several book series, and in particular then books by Swedish crime writers. Which is most interesting is that many of these crime writers, their entire series are read multiple times during the year studied. So they can read this, pile of books by Lars Kepler, for instance, for up to 4 times during the same year, for instance, which is, a kind of reading practice that no one would engage in print books. At least close to no one. So to conclude then, the empirical results is that audiobook reading practices, at least in part, they are quite dissimilar to other kind of reading practices. I've shown you these books as sleeping pills or books more or less used as music. And it's also important to study reading on all levels, on the aggregate level, on the subset level, but also on the individual level. And then we have the sort of more methodological conclusions, is that there's a large potential in reading consumption data. I'd say that previously unknown patterns can be known, and that structured data and straightforward statistical methods can take you really very, very far. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I think we now have a much better idea of what is going on in the field of reading studies and streaming data studies. And I'm looking for hands who wants to ask the first question. Yes, while our listeners are thinking about questions, I have a lot of them. Oh, but actually, first I will read out the question for the Zoom chat. Goes like this. Are the genre preferences among the audiobook users different from those of traditional readers? Maybe lighter genres might be even more popular because they require less focused state of mind and let people do something else while listening to the audiobooks.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, and your your intuition is perfectly right. So while I mean also in print books in Sweden, then popular genres, especially crime fiction, but also romance, etc., they are really important, but they are even more so, I mean, more biased in the audiobook segment. Almost all of the titles are what I would like to call popular genre fiction. So crime fiction is the most important, and then we have romance and other kinds of genres. So that is correct. And we have, I mean, interestingly, also we have tried to look at this also by text analysis. So we have compared sort of the syntactical structure of popular audiobooks and popular print books, also in the same genre. And then we can see that this actually holds true on a text level. That, I mean, the most popular audiobooks are, I mean, they are less structurally complex. They are much more straightforwardly written. They contain more dialogue. They are shorter. They have shorter sentences, etc. So yes, to have a book to work in audio, then you need it to be quite straightforwardly written, and in that way, it is mostly popular genre fiction. So yeah, that's correct.
So now the question from the audience.
Why do you think that it's dissimilar to paper books? I think paper book as a sleeping pill, it's a normal practice too.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I think that I should have, I mean, elaborated a bit on this. So what's really the largest difference is in these services, book streaming services in the Nordics at least, then what is counted as consumption is per minute streamed. So if you stream a book for 15 minutes, then the publisher and the author get paid for 15 minutes. And not for sort of the entity of the book. So this is a very large difference from when you buy a print book. Then you buy one book, and no matter how much you read it, I mean, you can read it for one time, for 20 times, for 100 times, or not at all, but the payment back to the publishers is the same. Here, in the audiobook format, then this is actually tracked all the time, meaning that you can see those things, and the publishers also get paid for these practices. So this is one part of the answer, which is an important difference between the audiobook medium, the streamed audiobook medium, and print books. And then when it comes to sort of the medium specificities involved, well, I mean, yes, you also use print books for going to sleep, but my assumption would be that this has been exaggerated with audiobooks, since as I said, that you can do this in a dark room with your eyes shut in various ways. All of these, I mean, that there is sort of a sleep timer already in the app suggests that sort of, yeah, this is one way of using these books. They are sort of there for make you sleep. The books that are published only for this purpose is something that we have never seen with print books before. So I think there is, although, I mean, slightly similar cases have been, or slightly similar uses have been there before with print books, I think that there is also a medium difference that matters. So I hope that was understandable.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your lecture. It was very interesting. And my question is do we still use the verb reading for audiobooks? Why we don't use the verb listening? Yes, because everything that we are reading, we read with our eyes and listening with ears. So I was listening for a lecture, but I was reading a presentation. Maybe there's some case in future to introduce new terminology.
Yeah, thanks. A great question. This is a great, a large discussion that is ongoing in the field of audiobook studies and elsewhere also. People have, they have different views on this. So some sort of refuse to speak of audiobook listening as reading, because as you say, it's something that you do with your ears and not with your eyes. You're not sort of deciphering alphanumerical signs, etc. Then we have the opposite branch who said that, well, this is, of course, this is reading in the way that you are sort of partaking in literary works and sort of in the sort of the meaning of these texts. And then they have more of a sort of a broader literacy perspective where these parts of the reading and not sort of the technical way of reading are focused. And then we have also, as you suggest, those scholars who have suggested sort of middle grounds in between those outlier positions. So that one scholar, for instance, speak of reading by seeing and reading by listening. And then we also have reading, for instance, blind people who use this, what's it called in English? I don't remember, but you can have these points that you read with your fingers, right? So that's also sort of a way of reading by touch. That's yet another sense involved, but also a kind of reading. So it really boils down to what kind of perspective you have on this issue and what you want to focus upon. I don't think that there is one sort of right or wrong way of looking at this, but I think it would just be stupid to say that, well, reading an audiobook is just the same thing as reading a print book, because it's obviously not, right? So it's a different thing. And I use the verb reading in my research because I come from publishing studies also. And then, the publishers all the time talk about these audiobooks as books that are being read by readers. So that's why I just sort of, in a sociological sense, I use what's mostly used. But I'm very, very aware of that. It's not at all that simple. And I agree with you that this is a very important distinction that we need to make all the time. I hope that's part of an answer.
I could add that we also call TV watchers viewers, although they're also listening and sometimes reading. So this is really a complex problem. So now the question from the chat. Do you also have data on voices reading the books, and if readers prefer particular voices, timbres of reading?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So we have what we have in terms of voice data is the performing narrator, so the name of the person who is narrating each book. And with this data, then you can follow and trace, for instance, the readers who are only interested in listening to one particular voice. It can be one sort of famous Swedish actor or something like that. So in one chapter of my forthcoming book, then I discuss only this kind of data, the voice data. It's not the actual voices, but I discussed them in terms of author gender. No, not author gender. Performing narrative gender, which often go hand in hand with the gender of the protagonist, for instance. So you want, at least the publishers want to have some sort of resemblance between the voice and sort of the leading figures in these works. And there has been lots of I mean, an assumption when audiobook readers or audiobook listeners, when they are surveyed, and ask for what's most important for you when you choose an audiobook, then many of them say that the performing narrator, the voice, is extremely important. So I really tried to find that kind of pattern, that the readers who just sort of seem to follow voices rather than authors or stories, but that they were very few. I don't think that it's really true that most audiobook readers follow voices. What I think is true in terms of voices is that most audiobook readers or listeners have their sort of voices that they cannot really stand, that they sort of get sort of furious with how this actor are sort of phrasing or nuancing things, and then they sort of choose to not read any audiobooks narrated by that specific person. So it's sort of has sort of a negative effect rather than a positive effect. I have seen very few readers who are only sort of listening to books by one particular performing narrator. So this is something that I didn't discuss today, but it's part of the book that's coming. But it's also something that could be really investigated more in depth. Also by looking at audio data, there are some studies that are sort of actually tracing the voices and how sort of the tonality and pitch and those kinds of things. But then again, you have more complex data. So then you have other issues that you will need to fix. That would be interesting to read such studies.
Hello, thank you very much. I have a question about, I didn't notice the genre children's literature. Probably there should be several different patterns. And is this children's literature consumption in audiobooks researched?
Thanks. Great question. So it's not a part of this book, but we have done another study, me and my colleague Anne Steiner. We wrote a report on children's use of audiobooks, or how audiobooks for children are being consumed. Unfortunately, it's only available in Swedish, but I can post the link in the chat here, and then you perhaps can use some Google Translate if you're really interested, because I don't think we will ever publish it in English. But basically, as you probably know, I mean, I take this from your question, and your interest is that audiobooks for children, or I mean, really sound saga, it has a long and strong tradition. So people children are used to listen to books read out aloud, or also these audiobooks or sound sagas, etc. So this is a much less new thing for kids in a way than it is for adults when looking at broader segments of readers. But still, we have seen some quite worrying figures that books published explicitly in the age segment 9 to 12, when sort of children should be sort of really training their reading by reading bulks of books. We have seen that some of these books that are, they are written deliberately to train children to read. They are transferred to audiobooks, and then they are consumed a lot because they are great stories. So that evokes sort of the question that perhaps our children will train less in in reading in the technical sense, because they are just sort of getting the fun out of it by just listening to the audiobook. And then you come back to this distinction between listening and reading, which is of course super important. And it's perhaps most important when it's about training technical reading when it comes to children. So that's the only study that I'm aware of right now. And I can post you the link in the chat, but as I said, unfortunately, it's in Swedish.
I have the following question. First of all, thank you for your presentation. And I have a question regarding genres. You have mentioned 3 groups of research methods / genres, such as archival material, social sciences methods, and digital social reading data. I have a question about such genres as blog posts, for example, which would fall maybe in a gray area between archival material and digital social reading data. How do you approach these genres in general, and what would be your advice to define these genres?
So sorry. So what was the genre? Did you say blockbuster? Or what?
Blog posts that are somewhere in between between archival material and digital social reading data. So it is kind of also close to comments and reviews, and on the other hand, it's also somewhat close to diaries and this kind of data.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think that my sort of this this division into 3, it's schematic, and in that way, it's not. I mean, there are always problems with trying to make these kinds of divisions. There are always middle cases, and I think that what you point towards here, blog posts, etc., is exactly that kind of middle ground between the archival material and digital social reading. So I would call this, I think, a kind of, I mean, a digital archival material, perhaps, because that depends on how social how open this blog is, and how much it is sort of intended to communicate with others. But methodologically, of course, it lays closer to digital social reading because it involves scraping, etc. But then sort of more ontologically, it might lie closer to the archival material of the past. So, but with the difference then that this involves our digital past. And researching digital past is still, I mean, these are still things that are unsolved. There are not sort of best practices out there yet. Also, when libraries and such, how they should store all this digital archive material is a large problem in itself. So I think that I think you're right that this is a middle ground, and depending a bit on the framing of the blog post, etc., it could connect to either of these 2 groups. Yeah, I hope that was helpful in some way.
Last question now.
Yeah, hello. I am interested in religious studies, so I wanted to ask you, maybe you have any data or any other research where we can see about religious text consumption, audio Bibles, Bhagavad Gita, mantras, I don't know, texts from sermons and etc.
That would be extremely interesting. I'm not even sure if the Bible is available in the Storytel platform. I have no idea. It's also interesting in the way that what you point towards, I mean, that these kinds of religious texts are also often, I mean, they are also often repeated in parts, right? So the parts of these texts are read over and over and over again. And what I do in my book is that I connect these sort of repeating audiobook practices also to sort of a longer line backwards in book history. And there was a German book historian called Rolf Engelsing, who talked about that there was a shift in reading somewhere in the, I mean, 18th century or something like that, when people went from a practice of rereading just a few canonical texts, including then, the religious texts that were really important. So like the Bible that was read night after night after night. And then they, with the birth of the modern book market, then we invented the practice of reading new books, reading one book one time and then moving on to the next one. So then I make the argument that in one way you could see that this sort of the circus is biting its own tail here, with the people that sort of are streaming only sort of the Harry Potter series or some favorite fan fiction word that they are in all the time. To return to your question, I have no such data in my data set, and I'm not even sure if if these texts are a part of these commercial platforms, but it would be really interesting to look at, because that is a particular kind of text material with particular reading practices attached to them. So I urge you to look it up and research it yourself.
No, another last question from the chat. Is your book going to be published as an audiobook?
Yeah, unfortunately, no, I don't think so. Since it's a lot of money involved in producing an audiobook, and my book will, I think, not become a big bestseller. I know that, the perhaps most famous audiobook scholar, Matthew Rubery, he has, tried so much to make his publisher publish his book in the audiobook format, just because, he thinks it's important. But I don't think that he managed yet. But perhaps, I guess you have heard this development of in speech synthesis and these synthetical audiobook voices, which presumably will make audiobook production much cheaper, since no human performing narrator will be involved. So perhaps in the future we will see also scholarly work published in the audiobook format. But I don't think my book will be the forerunner there, unfortunately.
Thank you. And now I feel so sorry that we cannot continue on our conversation during the coffee break, because I feel I just started to have questions. Perhaps another time. And I wish you saw and felt this energy that we have in this room. I see that this was very interesting for a lot of us. And now we wish you a great day. I will be in touch with you. Let's talk about sharing presentations, and maybe there will be some questions in a written form. And goodbye for now. And we are going to a break, and we'll meet again in the workshop sessions.